As Donald Trump paves the way for direct US entry into the war on Iran, it is worth taking a moment to absorb our descent into dystopia. Let's not pretend there was a golden age behind us. This was always a world defined by injustice, but goodness me, our current decline is precipitous. You may have read or watched dystopian fiction in years gone by and wondered how such nightmarish futures could ever come into being. And now here we are with a far-right authoritarian running the world's only superpower, allied to a genocidal state. And this far-right authoritarian casually posts on the internet orders to the Iranian people, everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran, in some sort of digital resurrection of the Mongol invasions. A promise to unleash mass destruction against one of the world's major cities with a population of 10 million, with anyone remaining, however old, however young, however infirm, however ill, however vulnerable, judged a legitimate target in practice, in total defiance of any international laws and norms. As justification, Trump declares, simply stated, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I said it over and over again. The justification for Israel's entirely unprovoked and baseless attack on Iran is that it is on the verge of acquiring a nuclear weapon. An article in The Intercept 10 years ago noted that Benjamin Netanyahu warned that an Iranian nuclear bomb was imminent in 1992, 1995, 2002, 2009, and 2012. Guess what? He was talking bullshit. Let's listen to Tulsi Gabbard, who is Donald Trump's director of national intelligence, testifying just 3 months ago.
The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. The IC continues to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program.
Well, that seems quite decisive, doesn't it? Let's hear a rather sage warning from the very same Tulsi Gabbard back in May 2019.
President Trump says that he doesn't want war with Iran, but that's exactly what he wants. Because that's exactly what Saudi Arabia, Netanyahu, Al-Qaeda, Bolton, Haley, and other neocons and neolibs want. That's what he puts first, not America.
Indeed, even according to CNN, itself often a slavish defender of disastrous US foreign policy, US intelligence assessments suggest that Iran is years away from any nuclear bomb. We've heard this nonsense, of course, before. This is Netanyahu in 2002. Begging US politicians to invade Iraq.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone. There is a new age, something new is happening.
Well, he got his wish, and who can have missed those positive reverberations? We should therefore note the insanity of the G7, that is the group of the supposedly advanced economies, issuing a statement declaring that Israel has the right to defend itself, as though Israel is the victim here. Israel launched the illegal and unprovoked attack. You cannot, as per the UN Charter, launch a war with the justification of an alleged future threat. That is illegal. The same G7 statement declared, Iran is the principal source of regional instability and terror. Israel's leader is literally a wanted man, with an arrest warrant against him issued by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Israel has wiped Gaza from the face of the earth as it commits genocide. It not only de facto annexes the West Bank, it illegally occupies and colonizes it. It has subjected it to relentless pogroms. It invades and occupies Syria on a whim with barely any coverage, as well as striking its neighbour with multiple missile strikes, without Western states even blinking. Its government ministers openly discuss forging a greater Israel, with Netanyahu's finance minister calling for his nation's borders to expand to Damascus. The principal source of regional instability and terror in the Middle East is obviously Israel, and it isn't even close. But here's what's going on. The cheerleaders of Israel depend on both turning reality on its head, as well as erasing our all too recent history. And erasing that history is particularly important when it comes to demonizing opponents of Western slaughters. Let's take Andrew Neil, formerly the BBC's flagship interviewer, who went on to found GB News before fleeing his Frankenstein's monster in disgust, claiming it left him close to a nervous breakdown. He responded to Kenny McCaskill, a former Scottish National Party Member of Parliament, who wrote about the possibility of the UK military being potentially used to defend Israel. He said, not my name, Selling arms, collusion and complicity is bad enough. This would be openly participating in Israeli aggression when peace is required. Andrew Neil responded, prominent Scottish politicians supporting separation from the UK, including the SNP, are siding with a medieval theocratic dictatorship, fighting for its very existence. Who would have thunk it? But of course, just as opponents of the Iraq War were smeared as stooges of Saddam Hussein, and opponents of the Afghan War were smeared as stooges of the Taliban, and opponents of the Libyan War were smeared as stooges of Colonel Gaddafi, now anyone who opposes dropping bombs on the heads of terrified civilians in Iran must of course be stooges of the Islamic Republic. Here, I'm afraid, is a reminder of a catastrophic failure. In every single one of those cases, those of us who were smeared were vindicated. I say vindicated, but it is a gruesome word to use in the circumstances because we were vindicated in the worst possible way. We predicted catastrophe, and catastrophe came in every single case. Yet the cheerleaders of these catastrophes suffered no consequences. Zero, zilch to their reputations. They continue to be treated as statesmen or sage commentators, respectable, moderate, mainstream. That meant they could walk from crime scene to crime scene, baying for yet more violence as though nothing had even happened. Their reputation still intact. It's even worse than that. Not only did those of us who opposed these total catastrophes not get any credit, not get treated as people who were tragically vindicated, and thus as people who are worth listening to in these circumstances. If anything, we were treated as even more dangerous and extreme than before. What are the consequences of this? According to a study by Brown University, over 4.5 million people were killed by the post-9/11 wars. 38 million people were displaced. Then there's the maiming, the trauma, we could go on. That's the price paid by our failure to make the architects of these catastrophes pay for what they did. In September 2002, 6 months before the Iraq War, Andrew Neil penned a column, and my word, it is instructive. It was headed, Peace Party seems strangely oblivious to the lessons of September 11. In the article, he lauded US President George W. Bush and UK Prime Minister Tony Blair for their calm and consistent speeches, in which, in support of launching an invasion of Iraq, they argued convincingly that doing nothing is a far greater threat to our peace and security than risking intervention now. Bush's speech to the UN was masterful, he declared, and muted the complaints of those who would prefer to do nothing. He ridiculed the critics of the Afghan war, which he presented as a total success, and indeed ridiculed the idea that thousands more Osama bin Ladens, as predicted following the invasion of Afghanistan, have somehow failed to materialise. This was, of course, before the Iraq War he cheered on turned that country into a playground, not just for Al-Qaeda, who ended up more powerful than ever before, but for a terrorist network even more extreme than bin Laden, ISIS, as well as the Taliban retaking Afghanistan, more powerful than ever. He declared Afghanistan had resurrected a healthy new fear of the strength of the US. He said Saddam Hussein's henchmen were trawling the world's shadier arms dealers so they could build more weapons of mass destruction. He couldn't have been clearer. He said Baghdad's suburbs were now dotted with secret installations, often posing, of course, as hospitals or schools, developing missile fuel bodies and guidance systems, chemical and biological warheads, and most sinister of all, he said, a renewed attempt to develop nuclear weapons. He browbeat opponents of the coming invasion, declaring, so what is it that the Peace Party does not understand? Saddam already has substantial stocks of chemical and biological weapons, and added he has embarked once more on a nuclear weapons program. He even declared that there was only one response to the doubters. What on earth is the case for waiting? And yet, everything he predicted was total and utter garbage. Totally discredited. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Yet listen to the pomposity with which this man spoke. His belief that the proponents of peace were not just wrong, but humiliatingly wrong. Oh, get this. He even said of opponents of war, it is unclear how many more times they have to be wrong before we are released from the obligation to take them too seriously. He deserves to have those words forced down his neck for the rest of his life. How is it possible that this man can be so outrageously wrong on Iraq, on Afghanistan, on something so serious, literally using his platform to advocate for violence? That's what he's doing, which did indeed unleash, by the way, blood and chaos on an unimaginable scale, and still be able to publicly prance around demanding yet another bloodbath while still demonising opponents of war as the de facto stooges of a foreign dictatorship. It is a criminal offence to publicly incite violence in Britain. Indeed, to support organisations such as Hamas on the grounds of the violence that they've perpetrated, and yet you can literally freely advocate what is in practice mass violence with repeatedly calamitous consequences, with millions of deaths, by the way, as that Brown University study underlines, and there's not even a social penalty, an absurdity, and one that condemns us to never-ending horror. Here's another thing. Netanyahu, who was wanted for war crimes, declared that unlike Israel, the Iranian regime targets civilians. This is a state which has butchered tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza alone, possibly hundreds of thousands, we don't even know, and killed far more Iranian civilians than vice versa. Yet 24 Israelis killed by Iranian attacks is apparently evidence that Tehran's regime is uniquely evil. In one single massacre last night, dozens of Palestinians were massacred, way over twice that number. They were massacred as they desperately looked for food. They were fired on by tanks. It is said that it resembles a horror film. And that's just one of those massacres. They've massacred hundreds of Palestinians looking for food. They're clearly doing it as a sport. And they're doing it because they know they can get away with anything. That Western governments and Western media outlets will let them get away with literally anything. That's what's happening. That's what we can see in real time being committed in Gaza. Now, of course, no civilian killings are acceptable. We should know what Kenneth Roth, the former director of Human Rights Watch, wrote. He said, Israel's close intermingling of military and civilian sites makes it difficult to know what Iran is aiming its missiles at. When Hamas does this in the tiny Gaza Strip, Israel accuses it of using human shields. Exactly this. If we apply the claims of Israel's cheerleaders to Israel itself, then military infrastructure existing amongst civilian infrastructure means you are using your own people as human shields. That's their definition in Gaza, which is far more densely populated. But in any case, all states do the same thing. Who puts their military infrastructure in the middle of a desert with a big sign on top labelled "Bomb Me"? It was always a lie. Actual Palestinian human shields were used by the Israeli military on an industrial scale, like an 8-year-old man with an explosive cord tied around his neck by Israeli soldiers, forced for hours to search for booby traps before he was shot dead alongside his elderly wife. That's a human shield. It's worth emphasising that Israel was under at least some growing pressure from Western states, however little, however late, until, conveniently, it distracted attention by attacking Iran with no provocation. What do you even say at this point? What do you even say? This whole onslaught against Iran is based on a pack of lies. It's yet another grave crime, and it's been used to distract from the genocide Israel's committing against the people of Gaza. We won't stop talking about Gaza, by the way. On that, you have our word. Please like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts and your comments. Help us take on the pro-genocide and pro-war media at patreon.com/OJS84. We're reaching millions of people. That's thanks to you across all the different platforms that we use. We're not funded by millionaires or billionaires or media moguls. We're funded by you, and you make all this possible. Do leave your thoughts, your comments, share the video, listen to us on the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Owen Jones Podcast. Speak to you soon.